I need you to understand something before any of this starts. I was not a good person. I am not telling you these stories from a place of innocence. I did things I chose, things I planned, things I told myself were harmless or necessary or justified. The way people always justify the things they have decided to do before they find a reason. And then something happened to each of us. Something that found us exactly where we were, doing exactly what we had always done, and showed us what it felt like to be on the other side of it. I want you to hear all four of us, because the horror in these stories is not what we did. It is what came back. It is what was waiting. It is the specific feeling of being hunted by something that knows exactly what you are. Listen. I had a system. I had refined it over months until it worked so consistently that I had stopped thinking of it as something dangerous. It had just become a thing I did. I targeted elderly couples specifically, not because I was cruel, or at least that is what I told myself, but because elderly couples were predictable. They followed routines. They trusted people who seemed to need help. They had been raised in a time when a stranger with car trouble on a dark road was just a stranger with car trouble on a dark road. Not a threat, not a calculation, just a person who needed assistance. I would find a quiet road, rural mostly, the kind of road that doesn't have streetlights and takes 20 minutes to reach from anywhere that matters. I would wait until I saw lights in a house, an older house usually. The kind with a porch, the kind where people still left the door unlocked, and I would knock. Car trouble, I would say. Could I use your phone? Just to call someone. Just for a moment. I am so sorry to bother you at this hour. They always let me in. Every time. That is the part that never stopped being true, and no matter how many times I did it, they always let me in. And once I was in, the rest was simple. The night everything changed, I had been driving for about an hour. It was November. The kind of cold that doesn't announce itself dramatically, just settles into everything quietly, until you realize you have been cold for so long. You forgot what warm felt like. I saw the house from about half a mile away. Single story, lights in 2 windows. A truck parked outside that was old enough to suggest the people inside were also old enough. I parked further down the road, walked up to the door, knocked. The woman who answered was small, smaller than I expected. She looked at me with eyes that were, and I am going to use this word carefully, too calm. Not the warmth of an elderly woman opening her door to a stranger in distress. Something else, something that looked like warmth, but was arranged on her face, the way a mask is arranged. I gave her my story, car trouble, phone call, so sorry. She stepped back and let me in, and the smell hit me immediately. Something I couldn't name. Old and dark and layered. Like the house had been holding something in its walls for a very long time. And the walls were tired of holding it. She led me to a kitchen, told me the phone was on the wall, and then a man appeared in the doorway. He introduced himself as Hank. He was the kind of large that doesn't come from a gym, the kind that comes from decades of physical work, and doesn't diminish with age, just becomes more settled, more permanent. He looked at me without speaking for long enough that I felt the silence as a physical thing. And then he smiled, and something in my chest said, "Leave. Right now. Just leave." I didn't leave. I picked up the phone. There was no dial tone. I held it to my ear anyway, pretended to dial, pretended to speak. And while I was pretending, I heard something from the back of the house, a sound that didn't fit, heavy, slow, the specific sound of something very large, moving in a space that wasn't quite big enough for it. I put the phone down. I thanked them. I said my friend was coming. I walked to the front door and I looked out at the road at where my car was parked, and I saw, even from that distance, even in that darkness, that all 4 tires were flat. I hadn't heard anyone go near the car. I hadn't been in that house for more than 10 minutes, but all 4 tires were flat. I turned around. Hank was right behind me, closer than he should have been for a man of his size moving across a wooden floor. He said, "You're not going anywhere tonight." And he smiled again. And this time the smile had something in it that the first one didn't. Something that understood exactly what I was and was pleased that I had come. I ran, not for the car, into the trees beside the road, because the trees were dark, and darkness was the only advantage I had. I heard the door open behind me. I heard heavy footsteps on the porch. And then I heard something that I have spent years trying to find an adequate description for. A sound from the tree line to my left. Not pursuit, not the sound of someone running after me. The sound of someone already in the trees, already waiting, already positioned between me and anywhere I might go. I ran for 40 minutes through that forest, fell twice, lost a shoe, hit a fence I didn't see until I was already over it, landing hard on the other side, on a road I didn't recognize. I ran along that road for another 20 minutes until I saw headlights. I flagged the car down. The driver was a woman in her 30s who looked at the state of me. One shoe, bleeding from both hands, shaking in a way I couldn't control, and didn't ask a single question. She just told me to get in and drove. I never went back to that road. I never looked for it on a map. I never tried to find out who lived in that house or what the sound in the trees had been. Some questions are less important than the distance you can put between yourself and the place that asked them. I stopped knocking on doors after that night. Not because I found morality, not because I reformed, because I understood for the first time what it felt like to knock on a door and have what opened it already know why you came. The blind spot. I knew that mall better than anyone, better than the store managers, better than the cleaning crew, better than the company that installed the security system, whose blind spots I had mapped within my first 2 weeks on the job, walking the floors during slow hours with a notepad, making marks, building a picture of every angle the cameras covered, and every angle they didn't. The blind spots were generous. Whoever had designed the system had prioritized the entrances and the registers, the obvious places, and left long stretches of aisle and stockroom corridor in a darkness that the cameras simply did not reach. I worked those blind spots. Small things at first. A bottle of something from the pharmacy. A jacket from the clothing store whose stockroom had a corner the camera pointed away from. Nothing dramatic, nothing that would trigger an audit. Just a slow, quiet accumulation of small things, taken carefully, over time, from a place that trusted me to protect it. I told myself it was compensation, that the overnight rate didn't reflect what the job actually cost a person. The sleep, the isolation, the specific loneliness of walking empty floors, in a building designed for crowds, at 3 in the morning. I told myself the things people tell themselves, and they worked, the way those things always work, right up until they don't. It started on a Tuesday, nothing dramatic, just a sound, from the direction of the food court, which was empty, which had been empty since 10 p.m. when the last staff member locked up and left. Children's laughter, brief, 2 or 3 seconds, then nothing. I stood completely still and listened to the nothing for a long time. Then I walked to the food court, every table empty, every chair pushed in, the specific stillness of a space designed for noise that has run out of it. I checked every corner, every doorway. I wrote nothing in the log, because writing it in the log meant explaining it. And I had no explanation. Wednesday, the same sound, from a different part of the mall, the corridor near the shoe store, brief. Gone before I reached it. Thursday, whispering. Not laughter this time, whispering. Too low to make out words, too deliberate to be the building settling, too close to be coming from anywhere that an empty building could generate sound from. I started checking the cameras, every hour, pulling up the feeds on the monitor at the security desk and going through them section by section, looking for movement, looking for a shape, looking for anything that explained what I was hearing. The cameras showed nothing. Empty corridors, empty stores, the blind spots, dark and featureless, the way blind spots are. And I sat with that, with the fact that whatever was making those sounds was doing it in the places the cameras couldn't see, in my places, in the exact coordinates. I had spent 2 weeks mapping. The last night was a Friday. I was at the security desk at 2 in the morning. The mall was completely silent in the way it had been completely silent every night before the Tuesday, before the laughter, before whatever had started on that Tuesday had decided to continue. And then the intercom crackled. The intercom that connected the security desk to the PA system throughout the building. The intercom that required a specific code to activate, a code that only building management and security had access to. It crackled, and then a voice came through it, not distorted, not distant, clear, the way a voice is clear when it is close to the microphone, when it is being deliberate. It said my full name, first name, last name, middle name that appears on no document I have ever shown to an employer, that I have not used since childhood, that I have not spoken aloud in years. All 3, in the correct order, said once, clearly. And then the intercom went silent. I left the building. I left my jacket at the desk. I left the monitor running. I left the log open. I walked to my car in the parking structure, not running, because something told me that running, in that parking structure, at 2 in the morning, was exactly what whatever was in that building wanted me to do. I drove home. I called the agency in the morning and told them I was sick. I called them the day after and told them I was resigning. I never went back inside that mall. I drove past it once, about 6 months later, on the way to somewhere else. I looked at the entrance as I passed, and I thought about the blind spots, about the careful map I had made, about how proud I had been, of my own thoroughness, of knowing every place the cameras didn't look. Something knew those places too. Something that had been there longer than I had. Something that had been watching the blind spots from the inside long before I started using them. And when it was ready, it said my name, all 3 of them. And I understood that it had known me from the beginning, that it had watched me map the building, that it had let me, that it had been patient, the way I had been patient, and then it had spoken. And that was enough. I told myself it wasn't what it was. For months I told myself that. I was interested in her. That was the word I used. Interested. Not obsessed. Not fixated. Not the other words, the accurate ones that I couldn't apply to myself. Because applying them would have required me to look at what I was actually doing. And I was not ready to look at that. Her name was Lauren. We had 2 classes together. She sat 3 rows ahead of me in the Tuesday lecture, and I had memorized the way she organized her notes, the specific color pens she used, the way she tucked her hair behind her left ear when she was concentrating. I found her online within a week of the semester starting. It wasn't difficult. People leave enormous amounts of themselves on the internet without understanding that the trail they are making can be followed by anyone patient enough to follow it. I was patient enough. I found her accounts, her locations, the coffee shop she went to on Wednesday mornings, the route she walked home on Tuesdays after the late lecture. I started walking that route, behind her, far enough back that I was just another person on a street, close enough that I could see where she turned. I told myself I was just walking, that the route was convenient, that it meant nothing. And then one Tuesday she stopped, in the middle of the pavement, and looked back. Not at me specifically, just back. The way a person looks back when something at the base of their brain, something older than conscious thought, sends a signal that the space behind them is not as empty as it should be. She stood there for a moment, then walked faster, and I stood on that pavement and I watched her go. And something shifted in me. Not guilt, not shame, fear, not of what I was doing to her, fear of being seen doing it, fear of the consequence, not the act. I stopped following her after that night. I told myself it was a decision, a choice I had made, from a place of reflection and self-awareness. It wasn't. It was fear. And fear, as I was about to discover, was a very reasonable thing to feel. It started 3 weeks later. A sound at my window, my bedroom window, 3rd floor, tapping, slow, rhythmic, 3 taps, then silence, then 3 more. I got up and looked. The street below was empty. The fire escape outside the window, empty. The window itself, nothing on the glass. I went back to bed. It happened again at 2 in the morning. 3 taps, silence, 3 more. I lay in the dark and I counted them, and I did not get up, because getting up meant looking, and something in me had decided, without my input, that looking was not what I wanted to do. A week later I was at my desk near the window, working late, and I saw movement in my peripheral vision, not at the window, below the window, on the street. A shape, standing on the opposite pavement, still, just standing, looking up. At my window, at me. I moved back from the window. The shape didn't move. I turned the desk lamp off, sat in the dark, and when I looked again, the pavement was empty. The knocking at the door came on a Saturday morning, loud, not polite. The kind of knocking that is not asking. I went to the door. I did not open it. I said, "Who is it?" Nothing. Then the knocking again, harder. I looked through the peephole. The hallway was empty, but the knocking was coming from my door, from the other side of my door, from something standing in an empty hallway that the peephole was showing me as having nothing in it. I did not open the door. I stood with my back against the wall beside it, not moving, not speaking, and I listened to the knocking, For 11 minutes before it stopped, I thought about Lauren, about the Tuesday pavement, about the way she had stopped and looked back, and the thing that had made her look was me. And I thought about what it felt like to be on the inside of a door with something outside it that knew you were there and was not going to stop until it was ready to stop. I thought about that for a long time. I still think about it. I moved apartments 2 months later. New building, new neighborhood. I checked the locks 3 times before bed for the first year. I still checked them twice. I never found out what was outside my door. I never found out what was standing on the pavement. I never found out. And I have made a deliberate peace with never finding out, because some answers come at a cost that I am not willing to pay. I know what I did. I know what I was, and I know that whatever found me accurately, found exactly what I was, and showed me, in the only language I would understand, what it feels like to be the thing someone else is watching. I never took anything. That was the thing about what I did, the thing that made it different, the thing I used to distinguish myself, in my own mind, from ordinary criminals. I never took a single thing. I left things. I had been doing it for 3 years before anyone noticed. And even then, the noticing was never quite right, never quite enough. I would find a house, study the routine, learn the layout from the outside, the windows, the door, the pattern of lights going on and off, the specific choreography of a household moving through its evening. And then when they were gone, I would go in, quietly, carefully, leaving no trace of the entry itself, and I would place something small, inconspicuous, a button in a kitchen drawer, a folded piece of paper behind a radiator, a coin under the edge of a rug, something that would be found eventually, or maybe never found, but that would create, in the people who lived there, that specific low-level unease of not being entirely sure whether their home was exactly as they left it. I found that feeling, the feeling I was creating in other people, deeply satisfying. I'm not going to pretend otherwise. The uncertainty, the second-guessing, the way people start checking things they never used to check, because something has shifted in them, some previously dormant awareness that the boundaries of their private space might not be as solid as they had believed. I did that to people, deliberately, for 3 years. And then someone did it to me. The first thing was a note slipped under my front door. No envelope, just a piece of paper folded once. My name on the outside, written in handwriting I didn't recognize, inside, a single line. It said, "We know what you leave behind." I stood in my hallway and I read it 3 times, and I told myself it was nothing, a prank, a coincidence, someone who knew me, making a joke that landed wrong. I threw it away. The second thing was a bird on my windowsill, my 3rd floor windowsill, dead. Placed there, not fallen, placed, with the specific deliberateness of something positioned rather than found, wings folded, eyes closed, like something had taken the time to arrange it before leaving it for me to find. I threw that away too. I checked my door locks. I told myself I was being irrational. The third thing was flowers, in my kitchen, Yellow flowers in a glass of water, on my kitchen counter, in an apartment I had locked before leaving that morning, and returned to that evening, and found exactly as I had left it, in every respect, except for the flowers, which had not been there, and were now there, in a glass of water, as if someone had not only placed them, but filled the glass, and arranged them, and left, through a door that showed no sign of being opened. I sat down on my kitchen floor, and I stayed there for a long time, not thinking, just sitting, with the flowers, in the silence of an apartment that suddenly felt like it had been inside someone else's awareness, for longer than I had been inside theirs. I started checking things, the way I had made other people check things, every drawer, every corner, every surface, looking for what had been left, what else had been placed, what I was now living alongside, without knowing it was there. I found a button in my kitchen drawer, behind the radiator in the bedroom, a folded piece of paper, under the edge of the living room rug, a coin. I sat on the floor of my living room, with those three things in my hands, and I understood, not just what was happening, what it felt like. What I had been creating in people for 3 years, this specific flavor of violation, the knowledge that someone had been inside your private space, had touched your things, had breathed your air, and left something of themselves behind, so you would know, without being able to prove it, that you were not as alone as you thought you were. I understood it completely, from the inside, for the first time. I started watching the street from my window, not every night, but most nights, sitting in the dark of my living room, looking down at the street, looking for something I couldn't name, but would recognize when I saw it. I saw them on a Thursday evening, an older couple, across the street, standing on the pavement outside the building opposite, not walking, not talking to each other, just standing, looking up at my window. The woman was holding something. I couldn't see it clearly from that distance. I got my binoculars, the ones I used for studying houses from a distance. I focused them on the woman's hand. She was holding a flower, yellow. The same yellow as the ones in my kitchen. She looked up at my window, and she smiled. And it was the specific smile of someone who has been waiting for you to look, and is pleased that you finally have. I dropped the binoculars. By the time I looked again, the pavement was empty. I have not placed anything in anyone's home since that Thursday. I have not studied a routine. I have not stood outside a lit window in the evening and watched the choreography of another person's private life. I have not done any of it, not because I found morality, not because I reformed, because I know now, with a certainty that lives in the body rather than the mind, that there are people in this world who know what I did, who found me, the way I found others, who studied my routine from the outside and came inside and left things so I would know, without being able to prove it, that they had been there, and they are still out there, somewhere, watching, the way I used to watch, with the same patience, the same stillness, the same quiet satisfaction of someone who has found exactly what they were looking for, and is in no particular hurry to finish. I check my locks every night. I check every drawer, every corner, every surface. I haven't found anything new since the coin, since the button, since the folded paper. But I keep checking. The way they kept checking. The people I left things for. I keep checking because I understand now what I gave those people. When I placed those small things in the corners of their lives, I gave them this permanent low hum of uncertainty, this inability to fully trust that what they are returning to is exactly what they left. I gave that to people for 3 years, and someone gave it back to me, and it turns out it lives in you differently when it is yours. It turns out the thing I was creating was heavier than I knew, and I carry it now, every night, every locked door, every checked drawer, every surface I run my hand across, looking for something that may or may not be there. I carry all of it. And somewhere out there, that older couple, that woman with the yellow flower, is carrying something too. The knowledge of what I am, the patience of someone who found me and decided that finding me was enough for now. Think about that tonight. I'll see you in the next one.